Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First, to a really extraordinary man, a great lieutenant governor, a great public servant, a friend of mine, a friend of all of ours, Bob Duffy. Let's give him a big round of applause. Robert Megna, I give him total credit for all the cuts in this budget were all Bob Megna. Bob and the entire Division of Budget staff did an extraordinary, extraordinary job. You know, I teased him when I first started. I said, well, you guys in budget, you only work a couple of weeks every year when you have to do the budget. It was a bad joke then. It was a bad joke now. They work all the time. And it seems, especially with what we've done over the past year or so, it has been a constant budget in progress, budget evolution, budget refinement, and I think, as you'll see, the fruit has really been born today. And let's give them another round of applause. Bob Megna. I know they've been introduced before, but I would like the personal privilege of introducing them again. As Bob said, we had an extraordinary year last year. And what made last year extraordinary was this, was us. It was the executive and the legislative working together and working extraordinarily well together. And that partnership, that collegiality, that 50-50 wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for my partners and friends in the legislature. And please give another round of applause to Majority Leader Dean Skelos. Pleasure to be with you, Dean. Speaker Sheldon Silver. Pleasure to be with you, Shelley. John Sampson and Brian Kolb, pleasure to be with both of you. All my friends and colleagues in the Senate, all my friends and colleagues in the Assembly, thank you very much for being here. I wanted to start on time today because I want to end on time. Not just today, but when we finish the budget. As you heard from Bob, the name of this budget is different. So the first page is different. It's an executive budget and reform plan. Normally you're presented an executive budget, but this is both a budget and a reform plan. We'll go over 5 aspects of it. The first is a budget plan, financial plan, as you're accustomed to being presented, and then an economic development plan, what we call reimagining government mandate relief, and addressing the education crisis, which are really elements of a reform plan. First, on the financial plan and balancing the budget. The good work we did last year really is paying dividends in many ways. This year's budget is refreshingly straightforward. Bob and I have talked about the fact that, you know, budgets are not supposed to be traumatic. If a budget is done well, unless you are vastly wrong, it should be a relatively normal, stable process. That has not been the experience over the past few years in Albany, but I think you'll be surprised at this year. Last April, we reduced the deficit and we made real cuts. Last December, we needed to do tax reform to stimulate the economy and to avoid a major problem in this budget that we would be talking about today, and we did just that. We also managed to cut middle-class taxes to the lowest rate in 58 years. And all throughout the year, we have been making management changes to the agencies in the way we've been doing the budget. Where do we start this year with the so-called givens? We start with an assumption of 4% in education, because that's what we passed last year, 4% in Medicaid, that's what we passed last year, 2.2% for SUNY CUNY, which is when we did rational tuition last year. We agreed to this year's budget for SUNY CUNY, and when you add it with the tuition increase, it's 2.2%. We've discussed a 2% spending cap, and as a given, that leaves us with a $2 billion deficit. Therefore, the question becomes, well, how do we close the deficit? And how do we do it with continuing the principles that we established last year? This is an honest and that is a disciplined budget. There is no sale of state assets, no one-shots, no new fees, no new taxes, no new hidden surprises. It is not a Cracker Jacks box. You're not going to find anything in the bottom of it. We're going to demonstrate fiscal discipline in this budget, real reform, and what we call entrepreneurial government. We'll begin by bringing honesty to the budget process. Now, last year we talked about reality-based budgeting as opposed to Albany-based budgeting for two of our largest areas, Medicaid and education. And we said that the definition of deficit outside of Albany normally means the difference between revenues and actual costs. Inside Albany, deficit is meant a shortfall to get to unaffordable increases. Last year, we eliminated the unsustainable 13% annual increases in Medicaid and education. Medicaid and education are roughly 50% of the budget, as you know. This year, the deficit exists in part because there are still other growth inflators in the law. And the formulas that are operating are not tied to performance outcomes or better serving the people. So we have a two-step plan. First, this year we will eliminate all the automatic inflators. Next year we will add performance and cost indices. So when it comes to state operations, which are mostly the state agencies, debt service, health care, et cetera, in the budget it called for a 4.5% increase in state agency operations. We propose that the agency operations be flat, which would be a savings of $1.3 billion. The Office of the Attorney General, the Office of Court Administration, and the Office of the State Controller have also agreed to accept flat funding levels this year for all three offices with zero growth. I'd like to, at this time, publicly thank them, Chief Judge Lippman, Controller DiNapoli, for your collegiality, for your understanding, and for your effective use of finances. The Medicaid budget, which in last year's budget we agreed to goes up 4%. That comes out to $614 million this year. The education budget, these are under local aid, goes up 4.1%. Actually, Medicaid and education go up pursuant to a formula that we agreed to, and the formula is about 4% and 4.1% respectively. But that would be an additional $805 million for education, total of $20 billion now going to education. The AIM program we propose as flat funding, $715 million last year, $715 million this year. The TANF Basic Assistance Grant we would grow at 5%, understanding the difficulty that many families are facing in this economy. We think a 5% increase is appropriate. Public assistance overall would be a 1.3% increase at $17 million. Therefore, the total of aid to localities, which was scheduled to increase at 3.9%, would actually increase at 2.6%. The difference between the 3.9 and the 2.6 is $756 million. When you add the cut from the flat funding for the state operations and the cooperation of the Office of Court Administration, Controller, Attorney General, that saves $1.3 billion. The savings from the aid to localities is an additional $756. That's $2 billion. That's the deficit that we had to close. You notice we closed the deficit with very few below-the-line cuts. The $2 billion is basically a cut against growth in most areas, areas, primarily cuts against the anticipated growth in the state agency budget. So, compared to what we went through last year, this is incredibly manageable, this budget. State operating funds will go up just under 2%. The all funds budget goes down slightly. All funds also includes federal funds on top of state funds. When you look at the all funds budget for the past 3 years, you'll see state spending is actually going down. From 2011 to 2012, we took a big drop. That was last year when we lost a lot of federal money, but even this year. So the trend line for state spending has been down, is fiscal discipline. This year, as I mentioned, the budget is manageable, but the reform proposals will be more of a challenge. First area we address is economic development. This, to me, is the greatest single question to us today as government professionals. Not just for this state government, for every state, for the federal government. How does government spur private sector job creation in a down economy while limiting spending and maintaining fiscal discipline? That really is the challenge that we face. And that really is the art form today. The answer is creative public-private sector partnerships that leverage state resources and assets to generate billions of dollars in economic growth. It's easy to say, it's hard to do. We've been exploring and developing a concept we call entrepreneurial government. How do you get the public sector to work with the private sector? And how do you get all aspects of the public sector to work together? How do you actually get those agencies to work with the authorities? How do you get the Port Authority and the MTA and the Bridge Authority? How do you get all these authorities working together, all these acronyms working together, arranged in a way they actually spell something? And then how do you use the state assets and the state franchises in a way to create business opportunities for the private sector without spending money? That really is, to me, the art form of what we're trying to do in this economic development program. Now, this is the chart that we went through in the state of the state. That adds up to $25 billion in state, federal, and private sector activity. I want to give you more facts and details on what each one of these actually means. The New York Works Fund infrastructure will accelerate selected infrastructure projects that have maximum economic impact all across the state. We approved design-build legislation which will save at least 1 year in time and reduce costs by hundreds of millions of dollars. So we have priority projects that will create jobs and legislation passed that will actually facilitate them. Under this first phase, we'll do more than 100 bridges, 2,000 miles of roads, 90 municipal water systems, 48 state parks, 114 flood control projects across the state. The breakdown of the $15 billion is $1.3 billion from the state, $700 in new capital, $600 from existing capital that is accelerated, $1.7 billion from the federal government, and from the authorities, roughly $9 billion. $5 billion for the new Tappan Zee from the Thruway Authority, $3 billion from NYSERDA and Port Authority, and $700 to complete the MTA capital plan. The MTA, by the way, is fully funded in this budget for the $250 that we used for the tax relief in December. We said we would fully fund MTA, and we did. Private funding would be $3 billion. That will leverage $15 billion in economic activity. The Convention Center at Aqueduct Park, 3.2 million square feet. Javits Center is about 800,000 square feet. So this convention center would be roughly 3 times the size of Javits. Now, they asked a question in a public opinion poll past couple of days. I don't know if you saw the stories, and most people are against government building a convention center in Queens. That was the question. Should government build a convention center in Queens? And most people said no. Maybe there's a little anti-Queens in there. As a former Queens person, I'm sensitive. But I don't think that's what it was. If you asked me, am I in favor of government building a convention center, I would say no. Convention centers are tricky economic propositions. Government building a large public works right away makes me anxious and nervous. It sounds like another good idea gone bad. That is not what this is. This is one of the premier companies on the globe that does gaming, that does development, that has rights at Aqueduct previously granted, that has a Racino license currently, that wants to expand on the land that they currently control. The state would have to grant additional Racino rights, more gaming machines, but it's their money, their capital, their risk, their cost. They build it, they operate it. Part of it is a convention center, part of it is expanded gaming facilities. It's $4 billion of economic activity to the state, with virtually zero as an investment from the state. And we don't put a shovel in the ground. Phase 1 would also include 1,000 hotel rooms. Phase 2 would include 2,000 hotel rooms, $4 billion, zero investment from the state. To me, this is the entrepreneurial government, example of entrepreneurial government. How do you use the government, use the franchise to create activity without you spending money that you don't have? That would then free up the Javits Center, which has been talked about for years, that we have to do something with the Javits Center. It's not competitive as a convention center, and it blocks off the west side of Manhattan. We would make Javits Center Battery Park City 2, same model, state authority, state master plans, state finds funding, resources for the state from the development, but the private sector actually comes in and builds. It's 18 acres on New York's west side. We believe it would generate $2 billion of economic activity, zero cost to the state. We are in the midst of establishing energy highways, and we'll have an energy highway task force that's going to issue an RFP to connect the dots, as we discussed in the State of the State, and to bring supply from upstate New York towards downstate. Private sector companies are interested and excited to participate in this. We believe it's going to be $2 billion in private sector investment with zero commitment from the state. Constitutional amendment to legalize casino gaming, as we've discussed. A relatively conservative estimate is $1 billion more projected revenue for the state. No cost to the state. Of course, we'd have some administrative costs. We believe we should combine racing and wagering and lottery to develop a new gaming oversight board, but those are relatively minimal administrative costs. City of Buffalo investment, $1 billion to bring business back. I believe this is a long-term positive investment for the state. If we invest in Buffalo and we turn around Buffalo and Buffalo is generating jobs, it adds to our balance sheet. Buffalo is on our balance sheet, right? The way we anticipate for the first year or two booking the $1 billion for Buffalo until we have a specific plan, $100 million this year, $100 million next year, and the funds are flexible depending on what the business plan is that actually comes to Buffalo. In summary, you'll see $1.5 billion from the state, $1.7 from the federal government, $12 billion from the private sector, $9 billion from other sources, primarily authorities, total of $25 billion of economic activity, leveraging $1.5 billion from the state. Section 3, reimagining government. SAGE effort is ongoing, and it's very important, and it must address the foundation of government. Roughly 1/3 of the state budget goes to service providers. There are 140,000 providers that the state contracts with. That is a mind-boggling number to me. Just think of that, 140,000 providers among all these agencies, different systems, different financial systems, different computer systems, all doing it differently. When you get into the reorganization of government the way we have over this past year, you find out that government hasn't been organized at all, really. It's just evolved over time. It started with Al Smith's chart, and then year after year, things were just added to it. And it just grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it is truly unmanageable. The way it grows is that programs every year are legislated. And every year you have dozens of more programs that are legislated that get assigned to an agency. Programs never go away, and they just get added one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other. So you're operating programs from the 60s, from the 70s, from the 80s, and just more and more. Meanwhile, we've been decreasing the personnel in these agencies. So the workload is going up, the personnel is going down, and there's never been a realignment or reorganization of the workload. And what the agencies are saying and the personnel are saying is at one point something has to give. You just can't keep bringing more and more work, more and more specific programs with a diminishing workload. It is very true. The number of programs increase, the number of personnel decrease. For example, 13 agencies administer 91 job training programs. All different varieties, all basically the same, but all a little bit different. 91 different laws, 91 different training programs. Department of Labor alone, 40 different job training programs. You don't need 90 different programs. 90 different authors, 90 different sponsors, 90 different bills. I understand why. Tom Libas wanted to have his own job training bill. I know Tom. At one point, we have to say, we're going to consolidate, we're going to merge, and make it workable. HCR, 40 housing programs. We must reevaluate the functions of government across agencies. We're going to do SAGE on steroids this year. We will submit a plan to the legislature before the end of the session to eliminate hundreds of redundant and obsolete programs to the legislature. Second, we must cap and control administrative costs and executive compensation. 140,000 groups we contract with. The administrative cost, what we pay for back office overhead in a program, ranges from 3% to 50%, which means some groups, 50 cents on the dollar, just administrative overhead, written into the program. Other groups, 3%. Well, how do you justify it? Well, 2 different programs, 2 different bills, 2 different agencies. One government, 50% administrative overhead. Executive compensation in our contracts goes from $50,000 to over $1 million executive compensation for people who are running the organizations that we contract with. So to give you an example, there's a provider that provides downstate early intervention special ed, funded 99% with public funds, $19 million annually in public money to provide the service. $3 million in administrative costs to the state. The CEO draws a salary of $2.2 million and $1 million as a shareholder distribution from profits. How do we justify this spending to the taxpayers of this state? It has to stop. It has to stop this year. Healthcare redesign, the MRT team, Medicaid redesign team, has done an extraordinary, extraordinary job, better than we could have hoped. We must continue that by enacting the health exchange. There is no cost to the state. It is fully funded by the federal government. It'll cover 1 million uninsured New Yorkers. It will also save money for individuals who are now paying for their own plan by 66%, and it helps small businesses by cutting their cost by 22%. Mandate relief is something everyone wants to do in concept, except nobody wants to really do it when they hear what it is. Hopefully, this year, it's different. Medicaid is a major cost driver for counties. The Medicaid county program is $8 billion. Some people will say, well, the state should pick up the $8 billion. When we have a printing press in our basement, like the federal government, then we'll pick up a program for $8 billion. Until then, we don't have $8 billion. But what the state has done is it has capped the cost of the increase in Medicaid. 2005, the state capped the amount of growth, and it phased it in over a number of years. Now, the county's cost has been capped at 3%. We have been paying the overage because the costs have been going up at a rate higher than 3%. So the state already pays over 3%. The county's point is, but the tax cap is 2%, the Medicaid cap is 3%, so really they're paying a point higher on Medicaid than the property tax cap. We understand the point, so this year we will go even further. We will phase in taking over the growth of Medicaid over 3 years to hold counties totally harmless from any increase. They now pay 3%. This year they'll pay 2%, the year after 1%, the year after that 0%. So they will be held harmless from all growth in Medicaid. The state will pick up the cap. That will be $61 million this year to the state, $187 the year after, $370 million the year after that. So that is a significant cost to the state, but we said we're serious about mandate relief, and I believe we should do it. If Medicaid is the #1 mandate, the second is pension reform. We can no longer sustain the current pension system. You know the numbers, 185% increase from 2009 to 2015. This is devastating to the state and the local governments. The argument that, well, pension reform doesn't save us any money this year is irrelevant, frankly. By definition, pension reform is not going to save you anything in the year it's enacted. By definition, it's on the out years. But what we're doing to ourselves here is allowing cholesterol to build up, and we see the number going up, 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 and we say, well, it's not going to save our life today. You know, it is an incremental process. We need pension reform. We need it desperately. We propose a new Tier 6 that will have a voluntary option for a defined contribution plan that follows the TIA-CREF type model. Now, SUNY system, the SUNY professors have the option of TIA-CREF model, where they can join a defined contribution plan. It has certain advantages over the state system. It vests immediately. The state system, you don't vest for 10 years. Maybe some people don't want to sign on as a lifetime employee. 10 years is a long time. They want to work a few years, get the benefits, and take a portable defined contribution plan to their new job. We pose it as an option. If they want to enroll in the traditional state program, that would be an option also. But give people the option. It is much, much cheaper for the state. All the private sector companies are doing it, and the person would have the option. Why wouldn't you want to give the person the option? If the person says, this better suits my financial situation, like so many SUNY professors, it better suits my financial situation, and it's cheaper for government, why wouldn't you do it? And that's the option that we pose. The plan will also have progressive contribution rates, 4%, 5%, and 6%. Share in risk reward, meaning when the market goes up, there'll be a share between government and the individual, and when the market goes down, there'll be a share between market and the individual. We also end the pension abuses by excluding overtime and other payments from the final average. When I was Attorney General, I did a number of cases. The abuses of overtime are rampant, widespread. They've gone on for years, and now is the time to stop it. This tier is 50% cheaper than tiers 3 and 4. 50% cheaper to the state. 50% cheaper to local governments. It affects no current union employee. We're only talking about future employees who may be hired by a union. I call them the unborn. There's no one to protect. It affects no current employee. I believe our responsibility is clear. Let's do pension reform. Let's do it in this budget. We never said pensions were a lifetime legacy for future workers who aren't hired yet. It never says anywhere the taxpayer must pay for benefits in the future, and we can't afford it. Our priority mission is education, we all agree. And we all agree that there's a crisis in education and that the focus has become more about the business interests of the system than the student's interest. There's a reform movement underway all across this nation that is shifting the focus onto the student rather than the industry, and student achievement rather than industry funding as a measure of success. It's not how much you spend, it's how much you achieve. We have to change our thinking that this should be about performance for the student and performance for the taxpayer. Are we getting what we pay for? Change our thinking from process to results, from the system to the individual, from the salaries and pensions to people who work in the system, to the graduation rates and the test results of the students, from the bureaucracy to the student. Because education really isn't an employment program for adults. It's an education program for the students. This was not supposed to be about the adults. It was supposed to be about the children. It was supposed to be the best way to educate children and respecting the tax dollar to do it. Somewhere along the way, we become more consumed with perpetuating the bureaucracy than focusing on achievement for the student. Last year, we began to change the funding by creating competitive grants based on performance. This year, we will include additional funds for our competitive grants, $250 million for competitive grants on top of the expense-based school aid increase and the increase targeted to low-wealth, high-need schools for a total of $800 million. In 2010, the federal government ran President Obama's Race to the Top program, which required real evaluations. We passed a law where the state then had real teacher evaluations. On that basis, we won the $700 million from the federal government. However, still to this day, there is no teacher evaluation system. 758 school districts, we have 0 evaluation systems. The 2010 law just hasn't worked. And the federal government is now saying the teacher evaluation system was a basis for the award. No award, no evaluation system, no money. So the federal government wants their money back. That would be $700 million. If they include the SIG funding, that's $1 billion from the state. Much of it from the poorest districts in the state, because the evaluation system has never been implemented. We can't lose $1 billion in federal aid from our education system. Most important, it's also the right thing to do. Taxpayers should get what they pay for. We pay the highest per pupil cost in the nation. We have some of the highest property taxes in the nation. We should have the best education system. Students deserve the best education. New York ranks 38th in terms of graduation. And teachers deserve the best input and help when they need it, and rewards and bonuses and incentives for those teachers who are doing well. Currently, there is a lawsuit between the unions and the State Education Department that has stopped the State Education Department from implementing an evaluation system. We have a two-step process. First, SED and the unions must end the lawsuit and finalize development of a real evaluation system, meaning an evaluation system where SED understands they represent the students and not the bureaucracy, and an evaluation system that is based on student achievement, observations, student feedback, and that also includes incentives for good performance, objective data, and fair and certain promotion and dismissal. If SED and the unions cannot agree on the evaluation protocol within 30 days, we will propose an evaluation system in our 30-day budget amendment. Once they agree on the evaluation protocol, we have to get the local school districts to implement the evaluation system. If the evaluation system is implemented by the local districts by September 1st, they will qualify for the competitive bonus pool program. In any event, if it's not accepted by January 17th, they will be ineligible for the state increase in funding of 4%. So it's three steps. First, we have to get the evaluation done. SED and the unions have to stop the lawsuit and come to terms. If they can't do it, we'll do it for them. Then we have to get the local districts to accept the evaluation. And we have two dates for those who get it done by September 1, by the beginning of the next school year. They'll get an incentive bonus by participating in the competitive pool. The end date is January 17th, a year from today. If they don't have it in place by that period of time, they won't get the state increase. I believe if we implement this system, the federal government will accept this and will not withdraw the federal Race to the Top funds. So that would save us $700 million that we desperately need. If we don't do this, we lose the Race to the Top money. So the equation is simple at the end of the day: no evaluation, no money, period. If we are serious about education, we really have no choice. It's not just losing $700 million. This is the way to reform education. Every state in the nation is doing it. That's why President Obama and the Race to the Top administration, Race to the Top program was all about moving towards evaluation. By the way, President Bush was doing the same type of thing before President Obama. So it's been many years. It's bipartisan. I understand it's hard to do, but I also understand if you're serious about improving education, this is what we have to do, and this is what we have to do this year. In closing, this is a pro-economic growth strategy based on fiscal discipline, real reform, and an exciting new idea for entrepreneurial government to lead us to a new New York. And in really last closing, one last point, I had a legislator who's a friend of mine come in to me this morning and said, you know, Andrew, some of the reform items, he calls me Andrew, except when he wants money, then he calls me governor. He said, Andrew, you know, some of the reform elements of the plan are difficult for some really big players in Albany. I understand that. I understand that We have a budget and we have a reform plan, and the reform program is aggressive. I understand it with education, I understand it with pension reform, and I understand the politics of the situation. This is posing dramatic change to the system. And the change creates disruption. And the change creates tension. Everything is the way it is in this system because it's been placed there for years with money, with power, with effort, and this is going to be a big change. I also believe, and I say this sincerely, that we don't really have a choice anyway. If you leave the status quo, if you do nothing, leave the status quo, you won't have the tension. But if we leave the status quo, then we will have failed also. Then we will have become part of the problem. And that's not why we're here in the first place. Then we lose $700 million in federal aid. Then we condemn the state and the local governments to more out years with a burden on pensions that they can't handle. So I understand the choices. Also remember, last year was such a success, not because we did the easy thing, because we did the hard thing last year. When you look back, it seems easy. It wasn't easy. Look at the bags and the lines on my face. It wasn't easy. None of it was easy. Property tax cap was not easy. Ethics or Moreland was not easy. Budget on time or extenders was not easy. Marriage equality was not easy. The CSEA contract was not easy. The PEF contract wasn't easy. We had to do it twice. It was so difficult. None of it was easy. It was hard. But that's why it was a success. Because we did what we had to do even though it was hard, and we did it well. And look, what we're talking about here are major shifts. Don't underestimate what we're trying to achieve. This is a totally different paradigm. We're taking these programs in this government and we're changing the perspective. We're changing it from the special interest focus to focus on the people. We closed 3,800 prison cells last year because prisons aren't an employment program for upstate New York at the expense of prisoners. We closed juvenile justice facilities because it made no sense to pay $250,000 a bed just to keep a facility open. We reformed Medicaid because it wasn't about the nursing home owner and the hospital owner. It was about the patient. And this year, we're talking about reforming education, which has been resistant to reform for years, and taking on the pension problem, which is another problem that has been resistant year after year after year. So it is difficult what we're trying to do. And it is going to be disruptive. But I also believe the people get it. People get it. They got it last year. They're going to get it this year. We're going to make this presentation 200 times all across the state. When they hear the facts, they're going to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and they're going to support it because they've been saying this to us for a lot of years. They don't use the technical jargon, but they say you have to make that government work, you have to make it cost less, you have to make education be about the kids, you have to get my taxes down. And that's what really matters at the end of the day. Yes, it will be disruptive here, but we're going to have support of the people of this state, and that's what really counts. And I believe it. We're going to create it. It's an agenda that comes from them and is for them and will be supported by them. And we have to present to them, but I'm sure they will. I also believe we have a great opportunity because we are building on a great platform. That list of accomplishments last year is staggering, and they get it. And when we go out there, and we've done a lot of events together, and you rattle off that list of accomplishments one after the other, after the other, after the other, when they're accustomed to the dysfunction of Albany and the dysfunction of the negativity, and now we stand up there with that all-star list of government achievement and success. They get it. They really do. And we've created something. We created a sense of optimism and hope. They believe. They believe in you. They believe in me. They believe in us. They believe in this. They believe in the state capitol. They believe in the government. They have hope once again for themselves, for their state, for their families, for their communities. And that is a great, great gift. The best thing we did last year was we regained the public trust. And that is a great gift. We regained the public trust, and that is a great gift and an awesome responsibility. Let's build on it this year, even higher, together. Thank you, and God bless you.